been working on issues of security and terrorism for the last 15 years, and one of the things that has always never fails to amaze me is the way in which those kind of issues get treated as if they are big, they are abstract, they are a big geopolitical game of chess that is played by clever men in offices far removed from the action that they're actually working on. And these are real issues, these are real people, these are human beings. On both sides of every conflict there are real people, and there are real people that get impacted, not just by the conflict, but by the choices that clever men in Whitehall offices make in response to those conflicts. And that mission is something which has always run through the work that I've done, not just as a researcher and an analyst, but also as the director of Hostage UK, working with the families of hostages during the kidnap, and then the family of the hostage post-release. And I was introduced to this the importance of this kind of approach when my own family went through the kidnap when I was studying at university. So I know all too well that big games of geopolitical chess have an impact on normal families that didn't even once consider that they would be part of foreign policy or security policy history. And injecting those real people and their stories into both our analysis of the problem, but also our prognosis of the solution, I think is absolutely critical and is just getting more and more important over time. So it was a real pleasure and an honour to be asked to take part in an event like this, which does what I think is so important, which is to privilege the voices and the stories of real people in a way that helps us, I think, to have a really important insight into some of those big games of chess, to help us to understand the problem better, and more importantly, to help us to understand the practical steps that we can take to solve it.
If you'd have asked me 20 years ago that I would be standing here in this room with Hidea having a discussion about compassion, I'd say, you're smoking crack. If anything, the constituents of our two respective organizations at the time would be more inclined to have a street battle than to be here and have this important discussion, and I'm really honored to be here with you today. To understand how I became a violent extremist, need to go back and look back to the beginning and look at my childhood. I was a very sensitive, bright little boy in a house where it wasn't safe to be emotionally sensitive. My father was really an emotional bully. And I learned at a very early age to suppress my feelings, to disconnect from them, to hide them, so that I wouldn't be shamed by my father for being a Nelly or a Jess, as he used to say. And so I learned to disconnect from my sense of feeling. The byproduct of that, of course, is you disconnect from other people's feelings too. I felt growing up weak, powerless, insignificant, unlovable, all of these things. And I chose music, you know, in that time where if I dressed as a punk rocker, people would go, hey, like, that guy's scary looking. It's kind of fashionable now, but I got a sense of power and notoriety out of it. Within the punk rock scene was the skinhead scene. And each time I went to the most extreme part, I got more power, more sense of notoriety. Unresolved anger always expresses itself as violence. And I chose a youth subculture to express that violence in an overt way against other people. More often than not, we do that violence to ourselves in an eating disorder, in behaviors or lifestyles that put us at risk. The body can even attack itself in the form of disease. Now, this was a choice I made. I want to be clear here. Everything I did, I chose to do. I'm not blaming anything on my childhood. I take full responsibility for the acts of violence that I did. But human beings also don't do anything without a payoff at the end. And what I got, someone asked me if an conference in Dublin put on by the AVE network, "Tony, how did you lose your humanity?" I said, "I didn't lose it. I traded it for acceptance and approval." And so as a young teenager going out into the world, I went into the world emotionally hungry, and I made choices that were awful. And I hurt a lot of people with acts of violence that I committed against communities, against people who did nothing wrong, gay bashings. I did some pretty horrific acts of violence. And I got involved in some of the most radical groups in the United States, Aryan Nations, White Aryan Resistance. I would participate in paramilitary training. But I was the propagandist, and at the height of my arrogance, with my head so far up my ego, I was on national television, harming 20, 30 million people at a time in talk shows in the United States. And that was the height of my arrogance. Do you want to know how and what turned that around? I was handed this beautiful baby little girl, and she had that like all scrunchy face, you know, hadn't opened her eyes yet. And as I'm holding her, her eyes open, and I see, for the first time, I connected to another human being since I was a child. And I was moved, and this change didn't happen overnight. But the impact that she had on me that day, and then 15 months later I had a son, and with that I got to parent him the way that I'd always wanted to be parented. I got to buy him all the toys that I never got as a kid. It was very therapeutic. And children, and this is, so many formers have this experience of children, and what do children offer that makes a difference? And it's compassion. It's love. It's safe to love a child because at that age they can reject you. You gotta wait 13 years before the rejection happens. And as I did this, my heart opened up. It was like a thawing process. And in that process, what I've learned to discover is that to hold that ideology of separation, of racism, of any of that type of stuff, you have to have a closed heart. You're in the mind and the heart is closed. If you open the heart, it's impossible to hold that ideology. An open heart closes off and makes the ideology irrelevant. You know, imagine a world where we're all really deeply connected to each other and to ourselves, because that's an important piece. That our ability to connect with other people is directly related to our ability to connect with ourselves. And so we have to work the two. If we can have compassion for everybody else but ourselves, that's about ego. And if we have compassion for ourselves and nobody else, that's narcissism. It's having it in that total balance. And great change doesn't happen from extraordinary people doing extraordinary things. It happens with lots of ordinary people doing ordinary things, but with a single intention behind it. And so I challenge you, when you go home, to do an act of compassion to someone you don't know, someone who even you feel may not even deserve it, and observe what that does to that person, and also observe what it does to you. Thank you.
When you were saying about 20 odd years ago, 20 odd years ago, we would literally been fighting, because 20 years ago I was sent to prison for demonstrating against the BNP, which is our extreme right wing, at a protest of 50,000 of us marched, and I was fighting with riot police to get to the headquarters, basically to take the place down. And throughout my process, when I was put on crime watch and when I was sent to prison, there was never any sense of there being an opportunity to have dialogue with riot police, or to have any sense of dialogue with the extreme right-wingers that I was protesting about. Because I think it's quite an important thing that when protests and things happen, there's never an opportunity or dialogue to have discussion with, well, one with the police, because they do what they do, and then there's no comeback then for whatever happens. That's been my experience anyway. And there's never the opportunity to have a discussion to challenge the views in person with the people that are far right. And when you're on the left or whether you're on the right, you stick to within what you have, but you don't end up the discussions like what you have. You know, I would like to have heard riot police to talk with me and share about where some of their violence, some of their aggression came from, their childhoods and things. And so those kind of dialogues, they don't tend to happen. My main things were about the importance, has forgiveness been important to you, in forgiving yourself, forgiving your dad, and do you see a way forward with kind of bringing people together from the different sides?
As far as forgiveness goes, absolutely. As long as we're carrying that anger and hatred around, it will always, like I said, express itself as violence in one way or another. And it's taken me a couple of years, but I have got to that point of forgiveness and compassion for my father. I know what his childhood was like, and I know exactly where it comes from. It's you talk about toxic shame as that sort of perpetual feeling of being less than and worthless that we often get in childhood, and it's passed down intergenerationally. I understand where he gets it, and I have compassion for him. My hardest challenge has been for me is forgiving myself and having compassion for the self. That's sort of the hardest piece that has come for me. It's I still struggle with it, and I still work at it, and it's a process. And as far as having dialogue with different groups, I think you're right. And the challenge is there's all kinds of ways in which we dehumanize each other, and the only way that we can dehumanize each other is when we've dehumanized ourselves. And there's societally accepted ways of dehumanizations. You know, the way we look at, you know, in the Middle East or whatever. And then there's ways that we dehumanize each other that, you know, like racism, where it's not accepted, but we're still dealing with dehumanization, and it needs to be a look at healing that, so that, you know, once you can humanize yourself, you can't dehumanize other people.
I guess I'd be curious about all the events, all the moments that happened in your life that would have evidenced that potential for compassion throughout your life. Because I guess they must always have been there.
In dealing with an ideology, compassion isn't an idea. We can talk about compassion, but compassion is something that needs to be experienced. I was in the gas station, I think it was last year. I've talked to this guy a couple of times. His name's Jeff. I think he's 70, I think he's Lebanese. And he just is really, he was in a minimum wage job, but he really takes his job seriously. I filled up my tank, and he came and handed me a coffee. I didn't ask for it, but he didn't have to do it, but he did it. And I got out of my car, and I said, Jeff, I see you. I said, you're a good man, you work hard, and I know this isn't the greatest job, but I want to let you know how much I value the service you give me, and I see you. And I pulled a $20 bill out of my wallet and handed it to him. And I could see his eyes welled up, because somebody saw him and recognized him for who he was. And he started to cry a little bit. He was grateful, and I was able to observe the effect of an act of compassion on that person. What surprised me the most is how it made me feel. I started to well up in tears in that moment of, you know, I'm still a little bit talking about it now. And I went away and I had a fantastic day. I just felt so good. It's, you know, $20, you can buy a couple cocktails to feel okay, but really that was the best $20, you know, in terms of adding joy to my life that I could have spent. And that experience, you can't talk about it, or say, you know, this is what happens. You have to actually experience and go through that. So I challenge you to do something like that.